All right, welcome back. And this is the fourth section of the Hume reading, and it will be the last. So after this, we say goodbye to the Scotsman David Hume. Um, and this last little section is on really the sort of the nature of the mind. What Hume is going to be talking about primarily, though, is memory and the role that memory plays in our perception of like this mind, this entity. So uh, what Hume is going to start off talking about is the things that two of the three things that the mind has, which creates the illusion of identity, which is resemblance and then causation. Remember, the third is contiguity, which he said the mind doesn't have. He'll talk about that a little bit. He'll explain why both of these things create the illusion that our memory is an indication of like this identity that we have, but that it is just that, it's an illusion. Um, we'll get a couple of definitions in this reading. So we get sort of a definition of memory, a definition of the mind, a definition of the soul. Um, and yeah, when we get to the end, not surprisingly, what Hume is going to be saying is that uh, there is no identity, there is no sameness. Thank you, Adobe, for updating. But yeah, there is no simplicity to this. There is just diversity. Okay. So hopefully this will be, well, if it's not clear by now, it'll be clear by the end of the reading. Let's jump right in. So pens and highlighters at the ready. We're on bottom left-hand side of the page. You should see page number 308. And we're looking at starting about halfway down the page, the paragraph beginning with "to begin with resemblance. Suppose we could see clearly." Okay, so hopefully you're ready to go. Um, so here we go. To begin with resemblance. So this is the first thing that Hume identified as being the, creating the illusion of identity. To begin with resemblance, suppose we could see clearly into the breast of another. He's just saying here we can see into someone, into their mind, and observe that succession of perceptions which constitutes his mind or thinking principle. Uh, and suppose that he always perceives the memory of a considerable part of past perceptions. 'Tis evident that nothing could more contribute to the bestowing a relation on the succession amidst all its variations. So this idea of bestowing a relation on this succession, this idea of oneness or similarity. For what is memory but a faculty by, so a nice definition of memory coming up here. So for Hume, what is memory? But a faculty by which we raise up the images of past perceptions. Sounds like a good, clean definition of memory. So memory is just a function of our mind or brain, depending on your slant, that raises up images of past perceptions, raises up thoughts that you've had previously. Um, and as an image necessarily resembles its object, must not the frequent placing of these resembling perceptions in the chain of thought convey the imagination more easily from one link to another, and make the whole thing seem like the continuance of one object? So, look, a good way to think about this is if I show you a picture of, say, a car, and I say, "What's this?" The natural reaction is going to be, "Well, it's a car." Is it? I thought it was a picture. Okay, now you might be sitting there going, "Oh, yeah, okay, it's a picture of a car." Yeah, but and Hume is not. Remember, it might seem like Hume is saying something really extreme here. All he's saying is, don't allow yourself to be fooled. If I hold up something and I say, "What is this?" Don't say it's a car when it's not a car. Say it's a picture of a car. Be more precise. Don't allow yourself to fall into false illusions, because bringing it back to identity. Well, if we're thinking of memories, for example, if these are really just pictures that are brought up from our memory, they're not the same thing as the thing that the picture was taken of. So that photo of, say, a car, it's not the same as the car that I took the photo of. Hume is simply pointing this out with our memories as well. But it feels like they're connected. Okay, it feels like there's some sort of link between them. All right. And so this creates the continuance. that we perceive, that there being one object. The memory links us to the object. Okay, so in this particular, then, the memory not only discovers the identity but also contributes to its production by producing the relation of resemblance among the perceptions. So resemblance here, the key thing, it looks like something else. And so our memory fools us into thinking it is the same as something else. It is inherently linked to something else. The case is the same whether we consider ourselves or others. So Hume here is really just saying it works as both a first person and third person account of mind. So that's the end of resemblance, really. He's just saying, well, the resemblance of our memories to real objects makes us feel like our memory is the real object. It's not. It is a separate thing. It's like a car versus a picture of a car. These are two very different things. Okay. Continuing on, as to causation, we may observe that the true idea of the human mind is to consider it as a system of different perceptions or different existences which are linked together by the relation of cause and effect and uh, mutually produce, destroy, influence, and modify each other. So that little section there was a nice definition of mind. But what Hume is talking about here is the idea of our thoughts causing each other, that there being a cause and effect link from one thought to the next to the next. This is really the domino argument, okay? And remember, just because domino 1 might strike domino 2, which might strike domino 3, that doesn't mean that they are all the same thing. Domino 1 is not the same as 2 or 3. They are distinct things. Hume is saying here that this illusion of causation, that one thing leads to another, fools our mind into thinking that they are one thing, that this is all one knitted together idea. For Hume, it's not. Okay. Our impressions give rise to their correspondent ideas, and these ideas in their turn produce other impressions. One thought chances another and draws after it a third, by which it is expelled in its turn. So Hume is really just talking about the flow of consciousness here, that thoughts both give rise to a new thought, but also destroy the previous thought. You can't be, for example, thinking of two things at once. Okay, you can flick between two things very rapidly, but it's impossible to think of two things at one time. Okay, whatever is in your conscious mind, this is really just one thing. If I want to think about something new, then whatever I'm thinking about now has to sort of be destroyed to do that. It can be brought back up again, but then whatever I was thinking about has to be destroyed. Okay. In this respect, I cannot compare the soul more properly with anything than to a republic or commonwealth, in which the several, so a definition of soul here, the several members are united by the reciprocal ties of government and subordination and give rise to other persons who propagate the same republic in the incessant changes of its parts. This will become a bit clearer in a moment. So, and as the same individual republic may not only change its members, but also its laws and constitutions, in like manner the same person may vary his character and disposition, as well as his impressions and ideas, without losing his identity. So here what's interesting, Hume is sort of saying, if we think of the soul now, and how people talk about the soul. Well, the best way to think about the soul is that of, kind of a government, a republic or a commonwealth. Let's take Australia, for example. What we're talking about when we discuss this, so we're talking about a collection of people and laws and systems and that sort of thing. That's what Australia is. Makes us give the identity of Australia. But all of these things could change. Okay, so let's say we fall under the rule of a fascist regime, we would still be Australia. So the identity remains, even though all of its constituent parts are changed. Now, this means that identity is not the same as the constituent parts. Okay, so Hume is saying that when people talk about the soul, that's kind of what they're talking about, as if there is this separate thing. That isn't just made up of parts. But he's going to be talking about the fact that, well, but there's no evidence of that. So whatever changes he endures, his several parts are connected by the relation of causation. And in this view, our identity with regard to the passions serve to corroborate that with regard to the imagination. By the making of our distant perceptions influence each other, and by giving us a present concern for our past or future pains or pleasures. Um, so what Hume is talking about here is this notion of causation. He's brought up this idea of passions. Um, you know, it's a little bit of a tricky idea, but I think the best way to think about passions, at least for our purposes, is to really just think about whatever you're interested in or whatever you're focusing on right now. This is your passion, okay? And this becomes like a driver of your thoughts. When you're focusing on something, it kind of drives your thoughts in a certain way. That's what passion is. Okay. It gives us, to quote the last line, it gives us a present concern for our past or future pains or pleasures. Okay. Let's continue on. As memory alone acquaints us with the continuance and extent of this succession of perceptions, 'tis to be considered upon that account chiefly as the source of personal identity. Sorry, yawning a bit. So, uh, I've in my book I've vigorously circled account chiefly. What he's saying is, let's read it again. As memory alone acquaints us with the continuance and extent of this succession of perceptions. So he's saying memory is the only thing that allows for us to see a link in our perceptions. Okay, if we immediately forgot everything, then we would have no memory of our previous thought. The only thing that creates the tie between one thought and another is the fact that we can remember things. 'Tis to be considered upon that account chiefly as the source of personal identity. So memory is the key of personal identity, Hume is saying. Okay, it is absolutely critical for the perception of personal identity. Had we no memory, we never should have any notion of causation, nor consequently of that chain of causes and effects which constitute our self or person. So to go back to the example I gave in the last video of the pool balls hitting each other or the billiard balls hitting each other, think of uh, think of someone who had no ability for memory. Okay, you take them out, you play pool with them, then you bring them the next day and you play pool with them again, they won't know what's going to happen when one ball hits another because they've never done this before. According to them, they have no memory of it. Okay, so this is very different from what we were talking about before. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It's our memory that creates this causation. Without memory, we have no perception of cause and effect, which in itself, remember, is an illusion. But having once acquired this notion of causation from the memory, we can extend the same chain of causes and consequently the identity of our persons beyond our memory and comprehend times and circumstances and actions which we have entirely forgotten, but suppose in general to have existed. For how few of our past actions are there of which we have any memory? So we feel like we have this continued, story of our lives locked away in our memory. And Hume is saying this provides us with the illusion of continued existence, of this continued identity that we have across space and time, particularly. But this last part, how few of our past actions are there of which we have any memory? How much of your past do you really remember? You know, um, and so he says, who can tell me, for instance, what were his thoughts and actions on the 1st of January 1715, or the 11th of March 1719, and the 3rd of August 1733? Not many of us can remember what we were doing at those times. I remember, on the 3rd of August 1733, it was a cold day that day. There was a little chill in the air. It was biting. Uh, a winter coat was definitely needed on that day, despite it being August. Um, No, I'm just kidding. I'm not old enough to have existed in 1733. I wasn't born until 1742. Uh, but the point that Hume is making is, well, if I give you a specific date and time, could you actually tell me what you were doing at that time? Like, the vast majority of the time, the answer is going to be no. You have no idea what you were doing in your past, yet you feel inherently linked to that because of this illusion of self, of identity. Okay. Um, so continue on. Or will he affirm, because he has entirely forgotten the incidents of these days, that the present self is not the same person with the self of that time, and by that means overturn all the most established notions of personal identity? So what Hume is saying here is really the only conclusion that you can make is you are not the same person as that person who existed in 1733. Okay? You're not, because you don't remember it. There is absolutely no link allowing evidence between one and the other. Nothing. Okay. So that's really the only conclusion you can come to. So in this view, therefore, conclusion coming up, memory does not so much produce as discover personal identity by showing us the relation of cause and effect among our different perceptions. Um, So memory discovers personal identity by showing us the relation of cause and effect among our different perceptions. It creates this illusion of cause and effect, of causation. Okay. It will be incumbent on those who affirm that memory produces entirely our personal identity to give a reason why we can thus extend our identity beyond our memory. Okay. Um, so yeah, here he's talking about the idea of, uh, our common perception of memory is that it extends, you are the person of your past that you don't remember. But how? Why? Uh, okay. The whole of this doctrine leads us to a conclusion, which is of great importance in the present affair, vis-a-vis that all the nice and subtle questions concerning personal identity can never possibly be decided, and are to be regarded rather as grammatical than as philosophical difficulties. So, what Hume is saying here is all of the subtle little questions when we're talking about personal identity, they are questions of linguistics. They're questions of the meaning of words that we use. They're not actually real philosophical questions. Um, Okay, it is simply a manner of imprecise language trying to provide an insight into really big ideas, but because it's imprecise, it really can't do it well. Okay, identity depends on the relation of ideas, and these relations produce identity by means of that easy transition they occasion. But as the relations and the easiness of the transition may diminish by insensible degrees, so transition can happen in insensible degrees. In other words, the change can be so slight that you don't even notice it happening. We have no just standard by which we can decide any dispute concerning the time when they acquire or lose a title to the name of identity. In other words, think of hmm, think of making jelly. This is a bit of a different one. You put the powder into the bowl and you put the water in and you mix it, and then you put it in the fridge. Now imagine that you were in there watching it. When does it become jelly and stop being water and crystals? At what point does that take place? Could you perfectly pinpoint the moment when it goes from being water and crystals to being jelly? Uh, yeah, really, the answer here has to be, well, no, not really. And so this is what he means by insensible degrees. Okay, the change is so gradual that you can't actually identify when that change has occurred. Um, and in this way, uh, we can't really we can't understand when they lose the title of water and crystals and acquire the title of jelly. No, we can't really decide this. Okay. Um, All the disputes concerning the identity of connected objects are merely verbal, except so far as the relation of parts gives rise to some fiction or imaginary principle of union, as we've already observed. So, in other words, um, uh, a lot of this is simply imprecision of language. It's us using words in a way that makes us think they mean something that they don't. Okay? The only way around this is by creating some sort of imaginary singularity, imaginary union. For example, like a soul, which would tie everything together. However, there's no evidence of this. Um, So, what I have said concerning the first origin and uncertainty of our notion of identity as applied to the human mind may be extended with little or no variation to that of simplicity. An object whose different coexistent parts are bound together by a close relation operates upon the imagination after much the same manner as one perfectly simple and indivisible, and requires not much greater stretch of thought in order to its conception. So here Hume is saying, um, what we're really discussing here is a problem of simplicity. Sometimes separate things are related together so well that it just feels like they are one. Okay, our mind tells us that they are one. This seems like the simplest way to approach these ideas. However, no matter how natural it might feel to talk about them like this, they are not one. They're not one in the same thing. Okay. From this similarity of operation, we attribute a simplicity to it and feign a principle of union as the support of this simplicity and the center of all the different parts and qualities of the object. So, really, what Hume is saying here, excuse me, is um, totally fine to, for example, call a cat a cat. No worries with this whatsoever. The worry that he has is when you start to identify a cat as an object in itself, as if this is one thing. Okay, it is not. It is the collection of hairs and limbs and organs and molecules that make up that cat. This is lots of separate things acting together to create the illusion of similarity or simplicity, rather. Okay, we create this notion of cat to provide a center that all of these things are bound to, but that center does not actually exist. Okay. Um, if I shave all the hair off the cat, is it still the same cat? Well, yes, it is. It just doesn't have any hair now. Okay. Um, the gradual change will make it, appear either the same or different depending on how much I'm changing. But that, central notion of cat doesn't actually exist. It is simply a collection of the parts that make it up. Okay. And they may change and we may still call that cat, or if enough of it changes, we may not. But um, it is just the collection of separate parts that our mind fools us into thinking are connected together. Okay, that's really the end of the reading. This last paragraph I'll rip through quickly, but it's Hume saying we can now move on. So thus we finished our examination of the several systems of philosophy, both of the intellectual and natural world, and in our miscellaneous way of reasoning have been led into several topics, which will either illustrate and confirm some preceding part of this discourse, or prepare the way for our following opinions. 'Tis now time to return to a more close examination of our subject and to proceed in the accurate anatomy of human nature, having fully explained the nature of our judgment and understanding. So that's it, Hume done. Okay, hopefully it's been clear. I know that Hume's a little bit difficult to understand at times, but if nothing else, just remember, for Hume, the only things that you can say you have knowledge of or actually exist are things that we have evidence for. We do not have evidence of personal identity. Okay, there is nothing that provides an indication that personal identity exists, at least in the common way it's defined as something that exists across an extended period of time. The best we can say of personal identity is that it is inherently linked to memory and it is only that which our memory links together, although these are separate memories. Okay, that's really the best we can say about personal identity. Nothing beyond that. Okay. Hope that's been clear. Next up is Locke, John Locke, another member of the English Enlightenment period. So start pre-reading that if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time. Have a good day, YouTube.